Hey guys, this is Kyle with Black and Red Save the World, and also here with Tabs. We're going to go ahead and just have a little bit of a discussion this evening, and discuss some current event issues and things going on with our feelings and our personal thoughts on the left and left-wing politics and theory. So we're going to go ahead and start this, and hope you all enjoy.
All right. Hey, everybody. Yeah, my name is Tabitha. I'm a leftist, and I consider myself to be anarcho-syndicalist, but I'm also incrementalist in my approach. And I do think that social democracy is the best way to get to the kind of anarchist like utopia we eventually want to create. But anyway, what I really wanted to talk about today is the fracturing of the left that I've noticed it's happened in the past few years, especially since 2015 when Trump began running for president, and how the left has fractured since then, but also since Biden was elected. And basically just leftist strategy on dealing with the Biden election and the fracturing that has occurred as a result of that election. So, I mean, your thoughts on that,
Hmm. Yeah, so I'll start off because I didn't say it in the beginning as well. I'm a Marxist-Leninist. I have some tendencies towards Marxist-Leninist Maoism as well. Um, but my approach is pretty much pragmatic. Try what works. If it doesn't work, move on. So um, basically, to go on from there and discuss the fractured left, I would honestly say since I became involved really in politics, which was maybe a couple years before Trump's official run, and around, I want to say like around 2013, 2014, it was like when you first started hearing about people like Bernie Sanders and Rand Paul in mainstream politics and stuff like
yeah.
that. Those names started, popping up a lot more currently. And stuff like that. And that's when I first started taking notice. As far as when I really discovered the fracturing of the left, I truly believe it had existed long before that.
Mhm.
I believe this isn't. I don't believe it's simply systematic of Trump um, or Biden necessarily. I think there's really not been a cohesive left leaning political movement in the United States due to many reasons, being that of infiltration by the federal government. Case in point with the infiltration by the Black Panther Party. Um,
Absolutely. The CIA infiltration, which,
Absolutely,
yeah.
yeah. COINTELPRO,
Hmm.
the tapping of Martin Luther King's phones by the FBI and the CIA, the uh, surveillance units that they put on them. I believe, there's also a effort by um, both intelligence agencies to get infiltration into the left-wing academia of the United States, going back as far as like the 50s and 60s.
Well,
Um,
yeah, because that was the cultural Marxism scare that started happening. I mean, that was built on decades of degeneration theory that had been coming from America. And,
mhm,
I mean, that was, and it all culminated in this idea that there were evil Marxists going into colleges and corrupting the college students into leftist thinking. So like that idea is very old. And
mhm,
I think that there was indeed infiltration into that as well, because it was more common in America to hold those beliefs than you think. I mean, a lot of people don't even know that, like, Margaret Sanger, what the Planned Parenthood, the founder of Planned Parenthood was also a eugenicist. Those ideas were very common. So,
yeah.
um, So yeah, that was a normal thing to think back in the 50s, that there was
Yeah.
like leftist infiltration in the colleges. So it's been going around for a long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, no, and you hear that common trope of, oh, you weren't so liberal until you went to college and stuff like that from,
Mm,
parents or grandparents or whatnot and what have you. And it's just like, well, I may not have been, it's like you may not have been liberal or whatever, but you can educate yourself and, change your opinions. There's nothing wrong with that. And, and that's what education is for, is to, bring you out of being naive and being ignorant, and
right.
to, educate yourself. If that's not the end game of going to college, then what are you doing there?
Well, I mean, it just goes to show, like the people who do go to college end up becoming more liberal, like they're becoming educated. Like it just goes to show who's more correct. Like, you know what I mean? It
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean that there's this like brainwashing that's going on. That's the dumbest thing. I mean, both you and I went to college. I can attest that like I was never once shut down for anything I believed in class or anything like that. And not to say that I believed right wing things, but I never heard anybody who also believed that, be dismissed, and even in like a human sexuality course or anything like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like it's not real. It's a completely fake. So it's like the fact that people become more liberal when they go to college is just a testament to the fact that education um is, like liberalism is more akin to like what's more correct as far as like becoming educated. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess I probably flubbed the way I said that, but yeah.
Okay. It's
But
okay.
yeah,
No, my first introductions to Marxism and socialism as a whole wasn't so much necessarily college. It was a few friends that I met. I won't name any names because I want to, be respectful of their privacy and all that. But
mhm.
that's basically, how it started for me. Is I met some friends who were anarchists. I met some friends who were Marxists, and basically the more I read and listened to what they had to say, and the more I basically went and read material that they had offered up as basically starting points, the more I started to agree with the perspectives that were being presented to me. And basically the overwhelming and Marx in particular, the overwhelming nature in which he broke down everything to a minute detail in things like Capital and his other works, as well as to what he basically describes as capitalism at the time of his life when he was writing Capital, and how much detail he spent into breaking down how each mechanism of the system works, and why he personally was against it, is just why I felt a draw towards it. Because the more I sat there and I thought about it, the more I'm like, a lot of this doesn't make sense. Why are we as a society still living on a system that is predatory by nature? That is, we have the means to be a post scarcity society, but yet we have shortages, like during a pandemic, of you know basic things like toilet paper. you
Right.
know
Yeah.
because of what reason? What reasons, do we have? What reason do we have for those shortages? Um, the profit driven system is not a sustainable method if shit hits the fan. You know what I mean? And it seems like every 15 to 20 years, shit does hit the fan one way or another in this
Right.
system. It just keeps reoccurring over and over and over again. and there's, it's like there's a dip, there's a recovery, there's a dip, there's a recovery, and it just seems the recovery gets worse. The recovery gets less and less with each dip, but people are still, making large sums amount of money off of things like foreclosing homes on working families. Something I personally went through the 2007
Yeah.
recession. you know
Yeah, I mean, and I completely agree, but I really think that the pandemic really exacerbated these feelings in the cultural zeitgeist, like people like you or I
oh
have been feeling this way for a long time. Like I know I've
100% agree.
yeah, since the Twin Towers fell, like I was, fighting for leftists. I mean, back then it was pretty simplistic, like legalize weed and vote for Ralph Nader, but but yeah, to today it's a lot more sophisticated. But I really think that the pandemic brought these feelings out in people in a lot more visceral way, because people have literally just lost their businesses. They've lost their livelihoods. They're struggling to put food on the table, and our government is basically saying, "Fuck off. We're going to continue bombing in Yemen and spending our money on private prisons and stuff like that, and we're going to fight for months on end whether or not to give relief to the American citizens who were told they needed to shut their businesses down, and honestly should be being paid to stay home. Like the whole capitalism has really proven itself an utter failure, and I think that's what's gotten people a lot more angry. And I think like we're closer now to a revolution than we ever have been, but the problem is the left is gone in so many different directions on who to follow, which strategy to take on. I feel like there's like a certain, because you're a Marxist Leninist, but I feel like there's a difference between an ML and a tanky. And the tankies, like I feel like they saw the insurrection and they were just salivating at the mouth, thinking, "What if the left could do that?" Which would never fucking happen. Like, because we'd get hosed immediately, like it'd be a bloodbath. But I feel like they were foaming at the mouth thinking, that would be amazing, and honestly it would be. But here's the thing, you're just because you see power doesn't mean that those people want to work with you or ever will want to work with you. It's a totally different class of people, and I feel like that is hugely like it's all over the left right now, that idea. And it's just, like, who do we work with? What do we do? Whereas like somebody like me, I'm like, no, the people who are really in trouble right now are the people of color and the working class. Like, like, I mean, like, think about like the restaurant workers and, like call center workers right now, like warehouse workers, like this, essential workers.
No. And so for like, first off, my response to that is I want to say
drink of the proletariat, by the way, twisted tea.
she's got her twisted tea. I've got my cabin fever by New Holland. I know I'm bougie as fuck when it comes to my beer.
Yeah. I'm bougie when it comes to everything else, so
but anyways, so my first response to that is anyone who is serious on the left that looked at the Capitol riot or siege, whatever you want to call it, as a means to an end to achieving a workers' revolution or any type of socialist movement, you are delusional. You are 100% delusional. You are basically trying to co-opt a far right. I don't even want to say far right. I want to say fascist, because they are fascists at the end of the day. These people who are saying that the Sandy Hook school shootings weren't real and that they're false flag operations by the Fed to take away your guns and shit like that. This is just fascist bullshit rhetoric. They're the same people that, say George Soros funds Antifa, and that, the Jews control the global bank system and all that, and that the Rothschilds are behind this and all this nonsense. If you are truly serious on the left and you're siding with those fucking people, get out. Like, just go away. Like,
That, yeah.
we do not need you here. We do not want you here at this point.
But it's more prevalent than you'd think. That's the thing. Like, I was finding when I was on, I mean, you're a nerd, I'm a nerd, we're on leftist Reddit at some point during the day. Most I like, and you find yourself like seeing these, these posts that are apologetic towards Stalin, and yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Like, it's just become more prevalent than ever recently.
No, and there's to a degree some historic rewriting going on, especially like with MLs towards Stalin. I personally, I'm very indifferent towards Stalin. I don't view him as a good guy. I mean, number one, he was an anti-Semite, so you're gonna lose me to begin with that one.
Right.
There's numerous there are numerous sources that show his anti-Semitism. I mean, it was a product of his time. He grew up in Georgia, the country Georgia, which is a northern Caucasian country. Russia, the Russian Empire at the time had was rife with anti-Semitism. That in of itself, you're gonna lose me on to begin with. To me, Stalin is apologizing for Stalin is kind of weird, because it's like you want people to take your movement seriously if you're a Marxist Leninist, but you're gonna praise a guy who was absolutely incompetent otherwise. I mean, setting aside the anti-Semitism and the paranoia that he had, and just the absolute brutality that he had as more or less, he was a sociopath than anything else. Setting that aside, you're going to praise this guy because because of what else? He was absolutely incompetent when it came to doing anything realistically pragmatic with the Soviet Union. The only things that we can attribute to Stalin as good accomplishments were and I don't want to say good accomplishments. I want to rephrase that. I want to say accomplishments, because they had a heavy human price, but they were somewhat necessary in the long run. If you think about it, were the rapid industrialization of the Soviet Union in 15, 20 years time, from being a 95% agrarian country with little to no literacy throughout the country. And that's something you can say, that is kind of a good thing, but at the same time, there were millions that died as a result of that industrialization. I mean, anytime the country.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. I was just gonna say that pretty much happens anytime a country industrializes. You're going to have a human cost for it, one way or another.
Yeah, I was going to say that's pretty much happened, though, under every communist country. I mean, you look at how quickly China industrialized after they became communist from being an agricultural society. And I feel like even countries, smaller, undeveloped nations like Vietnam, which Vietnam, no one talks about, they're actually doing really great. And I feel like they haven't had a case of COVID in since like May or something like that. Like, yeah, then they've been able to count like how many people have caught COVID in Vietnam, which is not very far from China. Like it's under 100, I believe. So so they're doing incredibly well. But like pretty much every country that's adopted communism has been able to industrialize, but it's not always at a human price, like socialists, but there was definitely a human price from both Soviet Russia and Maoist China.
Yeah, no, and I mean that's the thing with like that's the thing with Stalin, is that he was incompetent a lot, and case in point, I mean he was so fearful that that somebody in the military would overthrow him at some point that he um, purged numerous military leaders in the Red Army at the time. Prior to this purge, Trotsky, and like I'm not necessarily a fan of Trotsky either. Before I say this, but I will say he did build the Red Army up into one of the most formidable fighting forces on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Had had the Red Army not had its leadership totally annihilated come 1941, when the Germans decided to cross over Poland and into the Ukraine and Belarus and just steamroll them until 1942, there could have been a very good potential that the Red Army could have instantly just repelled that, had they had the leadership in place to basically say, okay, we need to get planes off the ground, we need to get tanks onto the field, so on and so forth. But because that leadership was non-existent at that time, Nazi Germany was just basically able to go on about its business until the winter of 1941 and 1942 and so on. But I would say Mao, to a degree, was more of a brilliant military tactician, not so much a brilliant civilian implementer.
Mm-hmm.
When it came to basically the implementation of the Chinese government, I think he had a lot of lofty goals, and was pressing people too hard to achieve those goals in a little amount of time. And like, you can understand though from Mao's perspective that the U.S. had just invaded Korea after China had won after Mao's Red Army had won the Civil War in China. They're worried about the U.S. Army going all the way through and into China and overrunning Beijing and other parts of the country, and that was a very realistic threat. So Mao's you kind of see this tendency with like socialist countries, especially like with the early stages of like China and North Korea, of this sort of siege mentality of them just becoming so paranoid because they're just in this they're in a life and death struggle. There is a real threat, of course, from our government and other Western powers that
Mm-hmm.
they could be
The
taken out at
sanctions.
any time. But the siege mentality just it doesn't ever seem to lift in some cases. In China's it did, thankfully, and China's much more. I don't want to say necessarily a utopia today. They're not a utopia. They have their problems just like
It's
any other
still
country.
capitalist as far as I can tell. I mean, they've got, they have a workers' party, but they're
Mm,
basically a capitalist country, especially with the way the workers are treated, like, having to live in the factory in which they work. Like, so
yeah.
so.
Well, part of that too, to me, is also the CPC's leadership kind of taking a playbook out of Lenin's new economic policy,
Mm-hmm.
to a degree, which when the Soviet Union first came into existence, the economy was totally fucked. Because they just spent millions dumped millions of the czarist regime's treasury into the war effort for nothing, when millions of soldiers had died and there was a lack of workforce. People were starving and hungry. To stabilize their economy and to get things rolling again, Lenin had the new economic policy implemented, which allowed for some small businesses. I mean, like, they nationalized the banks, they nationalized like their energy sources, petrol, gas, and coal and stuff like that. but there were private businesses that were allowed to operate under the NEP in the beginning stages of the Soviet Union. And I think China basically did that, but took it a step further. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because they realized that, and that's the thing about capitalism, is capitalism itself is not necessarily inherently, I want to say it's not necessarily inherently evil. It's not necessarily inherently good either. It's more
Mm-hmm.
of like a neutral indifference, but it's capable of building up infrastructure in a very short period of time. And I think that's kind of like what China is using is a form of state capitalism, where they're allowing, you know, capitalism to operate, but under the watchful eye of the CPC, and they're making sure, it's not getting out of hand, and that the, you know, small capitalist class that is in China is not being able to attack, what the CPC is trying to achieve overall. But there are problems in China with, working conditions. That's something I feel like they should address. I wouldn't say it's necessarily all horrible. I think it's, in a lot of ways, it's similar to us.
Yeah.
So
Well, people that I
um,
know that have gone there to teach English have said
mhm.
it's not like terrible or anything out there. It's
Yeah, no,
similar in a
it's
lot of ways.
yeah, and that's the thing is, there's, like, I'm sure there's good parts there, or parts of China where it's just burgeoning, and it's culture, it's, you know art, and people are working and living and making money and doing well for themselves. And then I'm sure there are slums, and there are, people living in, squalor, and are having all these having a horrible life and stuff like that.
Kind of like
But
America.
yeah, yeah, no, and I think, but at the same time, though, in comparison to, the United States, where we have, as a one of the world's developed countries, we have one of the largest, I think, if not the largest, economic inequality gap in the world,
Yeah.
um, compared to China, who has the world's largest population, but has, since I think the 80s, when they started implementing this, policy of state sponsored capitalism, or state capitalism to a degree.
Hmm.
They've literally lifted millions of people out of, abject poverty, where, like, people were living on less than like a quarter a day, essentially, by comparison to the US, to survive off of, at that time, where most of the country was still, agrarian, and there wasn't really any infrastructure to what it is now, where, you have cities like Beijing, or, what's the other one I'm trying to think of? It just had all those protests. It's like
Oh,
an island, Hong Kong,
okay.
where those cities are like just beautiful burgeoning metropolises. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, and that's the thing I want to say about socialism as well, is like, it's not a perfect system. It's no system's ever going to be perfect, first and foremost. And I don't want to say, like, I don't want to basically sit there and, criticize China, over things that we're just as equally guilty of,
Right.
you know but, no system is perfect at the end of the day. Every country is going to have its own problems, but I think, in you know I think in the long run, it's been proven over and over again that, you know that this system is a lot more stable if, it's gone about the right way.
Hmm.
Case in point, you brought up Vietnam. Vietnam is, becoming one of the world's biggest medical researchers. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
so is Cuba. For example, Cuba, despite all the sanctions that our country has imposed on them, that has brought, like, a majority of their economic hardship upon them, and, them basically being 20, 30 years behind most of the rest of the developed world because of in a technological standpoint, they're still, providing, doctors to natural disaster zones free of
Hmm.
charge, and areas like Africa where there's, parts of Africa where there's just like no, it's complete absolute anarchy. There's no government structures whatsoever, and people are dying of AIDS and malaria and stuff like that. And these
Yeah.
people are going into these areas and, providing, medical aid and stuff like that. So I mean, there are good things and bad things with those countries, but you have to take it in stride as to what you personally feel is good, and what is the cost of it in the long run.
Well, I think a big problem with a lot of the major communist countries is the way the workers manage to seize control of
Mhm.
the um their labor, I guess. Yeah.
Mhm.
But because it's always been done in like a militaristic way, the Vanguard Party. And I think that's antithetical to the idea of what communism is actually supposed to be, which is a classless and stateless society. So yeah, like what I was saying is, it's basically it's antithetical to the idea of like a classless and stateless society, which is what communism is supposed to be, to use military force to obtain those means. And I mean, maybe people think it's necessary, but if it's ultimately not the means to an end where we're trying to go as far as like what we want out of a society, I don't think that using that like and as much as I respect the Black Panthers, for example, like I don't always think that it was a good look to do the militaristic thing, even though I think it's cool in a way, and I think most people do. But like the Vanguard Party idea, the means of force is ultimately the opposite of what we're trying to achieve with a communist society.
Yeah.
There should be no hierarchy, and literally when you're taking force over another person or entity, you're kind of you're doing so. It's like that whole change
Mm.
yourself and you can change the world kind of mentality,
Mm.
if that makes sense. There's a spiritual element to communism that isn't talked about enough. And
Yeah.
I think that that's where that comes from, that that nonviolent approach,
Yeah. And well, the thing I want to say about that is, I would love it if we could, get everyone on board with this, through reason and logic, through, civil discussion. And I think that's part of that is necessary with, with case in point, us talking and, putting this out, into the ether for people to listen to and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But at the same time, you know, we we as leftists also have to realize we have a class enemy, and
Yeah.
that is the capitalist class. They are highly organized, brutally efficient, and very militaristic. To if we want to achieve our goals to a degree, we have to organize and be somewhat militaristic ourselves. Now, I'm not saying we have to go full on siege mentality like North Korea, where it's devolved into essentially a hereditary monarchy
Hmm.
with the trappings of a worker's paradise, which it's far from. I mean, I'm all for North Korea having self-determination, and if that's truly what their people want, then by all means, if they're not hurting anyone else, do what you want. But
It's not what their people want. I mean, I
yeah,
went down a rabbit hole of North Korea documentaries a few months ago, and no, it's just there's nothing actually
yeah,
communist about their society at
yeah,
all. It's a
and
military state.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like they even dropped, you know, socialism as the state ideology. They go by Juche now, which is kind of like this ultra nationalistic mentality of fuck everyone else, and you know, we're gonna do whatever we want. Either you can like it or you can leave. Either you can like it or you can go to jail. Basically, is what North Korea has boiled down to. And it's really disheartening to hear. You know, basically, it's very disheartening because we're already fighting an uphill battle as leftists to begin with, and you have people, you know, pointing to that and saying, "Well, that isn't that your aren't those your comrades?" And it's like, no,
No.
not necessarily. They're far from what I personally would want or anything like that. But you know, like I said, I can respect them wanting to do their own thing. You know, and part of that goes back to their history, and I think that's a lot of the background with like a lot of the authoritarian regimes that have happened in socialist countries over the years is because that's all they've ever known. I mean, Tsarist Russia, you know, existed for I think 1200, almost 1200 years before the USSR was established, almost uninterrupted.
And they
Um,
survived those attacks from Mongolian barbarians. So they saw the same
yeah,
kind of attitude being implemented against them. So
yeah,
yeah.
and you know, China itself it was an imperial authoritarian monarchy for God knows how many thousands of years. I mean, China itself is an ancient civilization, and the um, Chinese emperors can trace their lineage back to almost the same time as ancient Egypt, if not earlier.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so the point being is that a lot of these countries, that's really all they've ever known, and you know, expecting them to change all this overnight and you know have basically to become like I guess like you know, like Norway or Sweden or one of the social democratic countries,
Right.
if is a bit of a reach for them because, like I said, that's all they've ever known. You know, I think with China, it's starting to get closer to that. I mean, they really could have went into Hong Kong and totally just rounded up everyone and thrown them into camps and stuff like that, but they didn't. You know, yeah, there were some arrests made, but by and large, like the protests were allowed to go on. You know, and you know they didn't, you know, just go in and start, you know, black bagging, you know, every single person that was involved in in the leadership that's involved in those protests in Hong Kong. You know, for China's previous history, they showed a lot of restraint during those protests. They could have brought tanks in, and it could have been, you know, Tiananmen Square all over again.
Right.
But you know, they didn't. So I mean, to me that shows a testament to China's willingness to try and, you know, try and basically, you know, be what they represent, but at the same time they don't want to, you know, just roll over to every little demand that's made and just basically hand the country over to this you know, bourgeois movement that was happening in Hong Kong, because that's more or less what it stemmed from was, you know, they were trying to extradite a man that was accused of killing his girlfriend to the mainland to face trial, and you know, and basically people were freaking out because they passed a law saying that they could extradite individuals from Hong Kong or other, you know, special economic zones into the mainland to, you know, face trial and stuff like that. But
Yeah. I mean, Well, and that just goes to show that, over time, all cultures and societies and political systems, they grow,
Yeah,
and they grow into a more effective system. But I feel like within here in America, we've remained stagnant purposely because it's like based on this myth of the America being the greatest country on earth, that's
yeah,
still current is it's so deeply ingrained in our society, and these values that Americans hold, the hard work gets you ahead, those kinds of values are also deeply ingrained through the puritanical Christianity that this nation was founded on. So
mhm,
like these ideas, so we have stagnated as a society, whereas like a country like China has, even though they're not perfect, they have steadily grown towards a betterment, or Vietnam or Cuba or any of these societies, despite having any, sanctions on them, have progressed. And then you look at countries like Norway, Sweden, Finland, like the
mhm,
Nordic countries, Denmark, that we talk about all the time as like pillars to look towards a decent society, a good society. Iceland, they've progressed, whereas America is like holding on to this myth of of our supremacy,
mhm.
which really is stifling us. And I think that is where the frustration lies. Like, what do we on the left do about it? Do we rest on our laurels and settle for Biden? I feel like there is a side of people that I know that were very much leftist that are now just foaming at the mouth, because Biden's about to put Harriet Tubman on a $20 bill, which is cool. Like, I have no problem with that. But as if
Mhm.
that does anything to end systemic racism, if that puts one law into place that would have helped Breonna Taylor still be alive today.
Right.
They completely ignore that. They continue to put money into the police departments, and just completely ignore any kind of like real change, and just throw us like, oh,
Yeah.
BLM, but we're not going to do anything that BLM wants. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah. No, and I think that's like the whole thing with. I don't want to paint with the broad brush here, but that's the whole thing with like American liberalism to begin with. Is I mean, it's very much based in the status quo. Our political leadership, one way or the other, whether you look at it from the Republicans who are, you know, proto-fascists now. I want to say I want to say they're full-blown fascists, but they're getting there slowly, thankfully. But you
And
know,
the Proud Boys are full on fascists.
yeah,
The
no,
Boogaloo
yeah, no,
Boys are full on.
yeah, no. Those groups are, but I mean, I want to say, you know, the Republicans are somewhat different from the Proud Boys in
True.
some areas. I'm not defending them by any means. They're still shitty people and shittier elected officials by all means, but you know, and the Democrats are equally guilty of being shitty officials in my regards on
Mm-hmm.
that one. And that's the thing is like they're all about this symbolistic gestures of, you know, basically putting you know, not putting your money where your mouth is. You know, they'll preach and tell you what everything you want to hear, but they're not addressing these issues. Is, you know, to the point where we had the riots that happened in April onwards through until almost August, I think. You know, where you even had almost, I think in Washington State, there was even a full blown insurrection in part of Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
That was called the Cap Hill Autonomous Zone that eventually did fall apart after like a week or two. But the reason people got so angry and so frustrated about it is because you're not doing nothing about it. You're telling us what we want to hear, but you're not doing jack squat about it.
Right.
It goes back to, and I could go back to like, watching Zoom calls, a video of Zoom calls between, um, if, city officials on the police commission in LA, and general members of the public just basically going on these Zoom calls and screaming at their officials to send the National Guard home, that the police chief needs to be fired for his remarks as to saying that the protesters were just as much responsible for George Floyd's death, because riots were breaking out because people were angry, and stuff like that.
And of
you know
course
and
they
it,
do nothing. I haven't heard this
yeah,
story.
yeah, they and of course they do nothing, and it's the same, and it's the same thing like with Stephon Clark. That's a name that is almost been dropped out of the media. You don't hear about him no more. He was shot and killed, in his I think his grandmother or his mother's yard. He was on a cell phone and he was shot
Hmm.
and killed by the cops
And what
for no reason.
Amadou Diablo? How do you say his name? You know who I'm talking about? Same thing that happened to him. Amadou.
Was that the guy who was shot and killed in Columbus, I think?
Hmm. Yeah, and
Yeah.
he was in his yard. It was late at night. He was in his yard on his cell phone. They shot him. They didn't even give him an opportunity. The same thing with Tamir Rice. They didn't even get, I mean, Tamir Rice we hear about, but they didn't even give the poor kid an opportunity to
No,
put his
they rolled
hands
up on
up.
him
He
in
was
like they rolled up
bleeding.
on him in like, a third of a second or something like that, and just shot and killed him.
That guy's walking free, and so is actually so are two of, or actually all three of Floyd's murderers are
Yeah,
walking around on bail, right? They're out on bail right now. That's
and
infuriating. Like, why
yeah,
aren't we
and
doing anything about that? Why isn't that one of the first thing Biden wants to do? It's not. He's not really, like, it's the same thing with the stimulus package. He's not really delivering what he
yeah,
said he would.
yeah, yeah.
Some
No,
of
and I
us
mean,
worked hard to get him elected and he's not doing jack.
yeah, no, and that's the thing with, it is like, in our current political system, because there is no a real left party or representation in Congress, or even many state and local governments. There's just them paying lip service is what it boils down to. Is they're like I said, they're going to tell you everything you want to hear, but they're not going to do anything about it when it comes time to put up or shut up. And that's the thing with Biden is, he was saying all these things. He wants to cancel $10,000 of student loan debt,
Oh, it was
which would be,
$50,000. Remember that?
yeah, I remember that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wanted to cancel student loan debt and everything like that. And I'm like, it sounds great. I'm all for it if it actually happens. But I'm forgive me if I'm a little um, hesitant to throw my whole entire weight behind him. I mean, I didn't even and here's the thing, I didn't even want to vote in this last election cycle. I made my decision to go and vote um the day of the election. Literally I went maybe 3 hours before the polls were supposed to close
Yeah.
to actually vote for Biden. That's how indecisive I was, because I kept telling myself, I'm like, what's the point if he wins? It's there's not going to be as much harm reduction as everybody is talking about there's going to be. But at the same time, I don't want 4 more years of the former jackass
See,
being.
there is significant harm reduction in electing Biden, which is why, even though, like, obviously I was a Bernie supporter, like I worked hard, like, on, like, I made calls and stuff for Bernie when it was still okay to do that. But
Yeah,
um but yeah, like, as soon as Biden like got nominated, yeah, I immediately, like, my first reaction was recoil and disgust, like how could this happen? But eventually it's like Trump started progressively handling the pandemic
Yeah, no,
like
he
the
just
everything he did was just, it was like we need just anybody. Like I would have
yeah, he
settled for
was
anybody else.
yeah, he was yeah, Trump was just complete incompetency and stupidity and just absolute, just it was just a shit show dumpster fire to begin with. And I don't know why like this cult of personality has developed around him, and that's what it is just this cult of personality of
Well,
these
this is
people who
pretty
just
characteristic of fascism
yeah, no, and yeah,
historically.
no, I get that, him just basically telling them everything they want to hear again, going back to that same trope, but the thing is, he had no substance to back up the bullshit. He had to back up his bullshit, at the same time, or the substance that he did have was just, complete ineptitude. Open up these concentration camps on the border and, expand them even more, than what they previously were. And you're rounding up all these people and throwing them in, you're putting more drain on your own coffers, just keeping them there and feeding them and housing them. Like just, you know, if they're not, if they're not committing a crime, let them be, you know?
Well,
So
I mean, the thing that really that Trump really revealed, and not that it was that much of a surprise. I've known for a long time this country was incredibly racist, but
yeah,
some of the like comments, I remember initially when the children were being put in cages, I saw some comments underneath pictures of some of the kids that were so incredibly hateful,
yeah,
and there were hundreds of comments like these. It wasn't like just an outlier crazy dude. There were entire videos on YouTube created to defending the jailing of 3-year-old children, so
mhm,
like that to me, like just prove like it was
yeah,
mask off, for a lot of this country. And I think that um is a huge issue in America. And it's
mhm,
not it stems from like what this country was founded on, and this idea of um supremacy in general. And I mean a
mhm,
hierarchy in general. It's not even just based on race. The only reason race even exists is because white people in Spain wanted an excuse, a reason, like they wanted to excuse their African slave trade they were
yeah,
participating in, so they just had to fake some science and like say, well, they're less than us or whatever. And it's been
yeah,
permeating in the zeitgeist for centuries since then,
yeah.
before it wasn't a thing, and so like that's, this whole country is founded on that,
Yeah,
you know
no, and like, to look at that from a historical perspective, yeah, I mean, slavery is nothing new. Um,
right.
in the world, actually, the abolition of slavery, by and large, by most modern societies now, is actually relatively new in the scope of human history.
Hmm.
But the point being is that that's I think that's always been a mentality with any type of society like that, with including ours. I mean, the Romans, for example, had extreme anti-barbarian sentiment. Like, they would scorn anyone who was non-Roman or non-Greek as just, you know less than human. That's how they were raised and brought up. That's
Hmm.
where it becomes systemic. Our society has, a very similar, um our society had very similar viewpoints because we were a slave holding society, and to a degree still are.
Mhm.
I mean, the mass incarceration system is just
Yep.
another form of chattel slavery, because who does it disproportionately affect? Black people.
Next time you go to Burger King, look at their uniforms. They were made by people in jail.
Yeah.
I mean, and for 2 cents an hour or whatever they're paying
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's just absolutely, you know, mind-boggling how you can sit there and preach about this American exceptionalism when you have literally nothing to be exceptional about. You're living on stolen land, on a
Mhm.
country that is built on a mountain of bones, the bones of slaves and the bones of indigenous peoples that were wiped out either by disease or by later actions of the federal government to place them on reservations. You know, it's
Mhm.
it's you like we literally as Americans, we have nothing to be proud of as a society, other than the fact that other than a few instances in history where we have done the right thing, where we've had people who have came up and gone against the odds, people like MLK, Malcolm X,
Mhm.
or um our involvement in World War II, and trying to stop Nazi Germany and stuff like that.
Yeah, even our involvement in World War II sucked. I mean, if you know the real story of Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
So,
No, and I mean, like, we literally as a country do not have that very very much to be proud of. And generally what we do have to be proud of are those people who have stepped up to try and change things, are individuals who were persecuted the most within our society. Like I said, MLK, Malcolm X, Fred Hampton. Each of those individuals were assassinated, number
mhm.
one, and the media ran numerous smear campaigns. I mean, you can go look back at some of the columnists and columnist writings by newspaper journalists in Selma, days after the Selma March, and it's just absolutely a racist baiting sheet is all it is. Like, you could literally
Mhm.
set it next to Nazi Germany's Anton Drexler's Auf gut Deutsch, or in good German in the English translation, where it's just him constantly attacking the Jews for every single little thing, and
Right.
it's nearly identical. You know what I mean? Um, so it's just we as Americans have like nothing really as a country to be proud of, as far as this mentality of exceptionalism, that we are the best. And people want to romance the 1950s as this great era, the 1950s and 60s as this great era of prosperity. And to me it's like, really, you want to romance Jim
No,
Crow?
I'm not okay with that because I wouldn't have been able to have a bank account and I'm a
Right.
small business owner. So
Right. Right. And on top of that, you
yeah.
want to romance things like Jim Crow. You want to romance things
Right.
like the police corruption in NYC, and being in cohorts with the mafia, La Cosa Nostra, during the
Yeah.
60s, where and that's funny that we started this off by talking about Trump, and him and his father have ties to Cosa Nostra. I mean, the
Oh wow,
mafia the
yeah.
mafia built Trump Tower.
Yeah, yeah. I remember hearing something about that. You're right. But, I think that a huge problem probably it's not even like, just this American exceptionalism. I think that capitalism, this especially in late stage capitalism has beaten the American people and specifically the left into like kind of like a state of learned helplessness where we're just going to take any little scrap we can get because they haven't given us anything in so long, where other
Mm,
countries right now have been getting like monthly $2,000 a month or whatever, whatever amount that they can sustain their people, with through not working. You know what I mean? Whereas
right.
we've gotten like a $1,200 check and a $600 check, and they're fighting over $1,400. Like, so it's like we're really gonna clap for a stimulus bill that probably won't pass. Like,
Mhm.
let's be real. Like, let's be real. They're trying to get, I mean, I guess now that they're talking about doing budget reconciliation, I'm a little bit more optimistic. But before, when they were talking about that 60 vote majority crap, like, no
Yeah.
wonder like, we should be out in the street with torches right now and
Yeah.
guillotines at this point.
Yeah, no, and that's basically how, the late stage capitalism has operated within our society. Like you hit the nail on the head, is that people are so much indebted to the system right now. Like we're basically wage slaves. Like myself, like if I miss a paycheck, I can't make my rent payment.
Mm-hmm. Same.
You know, you know, so I literally can't, unless I have the vacation time or I have sick days to take. I can't take time off. You know what I mean? To be out in the streets, to be out protesting and organizing and stuff like that. Um, and it's just people from like Europe or something like that. They look at us and they're like, why aren't they look at instances like Flint, Michigan, where they still don't have clean running water, and
Right.
they're like, how are they not out there like just destroying the state capitol building over that right now? You know what I mean? And it's like you guys don't get it. You guys don't get how just monumentally crushing and absorbing and just downright austere this system really is it's nothing but scorn the poor, scorn those who make this country actually work,
Right.
um but
And
put
God
everyone
forbid you need help.
right.
If you've ever,
God forbid.
I've applied for welfare, and I can tell you they treat you like you're a prisoner. They
Yeah.
have to go through a metal detector and, empty your pockets on the way in and everything. And then the staff is like purposely rude. It's just they really do everything in their power to scorn you and treat you like you're less than if you need help or if you're poor. Like, I
Yeah.
don't, and that does not happen in other countries the way it
Yeah.
does here.
Yeah, and it's like God forbid if you get cancer and you can't afford it. You can't afford treatment. You're basically with the choice of, do I make the choice of being able to have a home, or do I go to chemotherapy or something like that? That to me is just, and if you have your general population making decisions like that on a daily basis, the system isn't working at that point. You have to admit, like, you guys are just nowhere near competent to meet the needs of your citizenship. And it's just absolutely disheartening how people are basically you know living day to day, and especially more so with this pandemic than ever before, and are basically just trying to do what little they can to survive. I mean, it's just it's so frustrating and so draining on you as a person, as a human being. Like, I mean, I've in the last I think this last year I found more gray hairs on my head than I have any time before in my life, and I'm
Yeah.
29 years old.
Yeah. Yep.
you
I
know,
know what
I'm
you mean.
I'm I'm like I'm on anti-anxiety medication now because I'm constantly stressing out about little minute things, of what could go wrong and stuff like that. It's just You
How
know,
are they handling COVID restrictions at the warehouse you work at? Has it been pretty good or
I can honestly say it's been pretty tight for the longest time. Like, we had a few cases in the early stages of the pandemic, and they really, worked hard to implement these, strict drastic measures to
uh,
get, quarantine those people. They've taken their foot off the pedal a little bit. I'm not gonna, name my company,
yeah.
that I work for, out for various reasons. But they dropped that, the extra $2 an hour of hazard pay we were getting, which was really helpful at the time.
Hmm.
Um, they
They
I think,
dropped that.
yeah, they dropped that.
They've done that. They do that at a lot of different companies, which is another factor in
Yeah.
why Americans feel as helpless as we do, you know.
Yeah, no, and there's they were also offering for the longest time, if you got sick with it, you would still get paid while you were in quarantine. I don't think they're offering that now. I think it's only if, like, you are directly, you get sick because someone came into the building and had it, and you were directly exposed to it on company premises, that they're going to, do that. I think that's the case now.
Mm,
Um, but it's in the beginning it was really good, and everyone was like, hey, this is great. Keep up the hard work. And then after a while now, it's I feel like we're getting a case now like every other week. It seems like, um, especially since winter's hit again.
hmm.
More people are getting sick, and there's not, and there's, it's, I think it's become normalized now, to
Yeah,
a degree. So it's not viewed as that much of a big deal, but it really still is. I've been
right.
fortunate, knock on wood, that I haven't came down with it. And I've been exposed to it. I don't know how many times I've been in direct contact with someone who has tested positive, for the virus, and I've been fortunate enough not to, either not to contract it, or if I have, I've been asymptomatic. But I don't know. I haven't been tested or nothing on that. But it could have been. It could be a lot worse. I could have contracted it, you know, or I could still contract it, and I'm out of work for 10 to 14 days without pay. What am I going to do if that, moratorium expires on evictions on 31st of, I think it's March or something like that. If I happen to come down with it and I have to miss 2 weeks of work, let alone what am I going to do for food without 2 weeks, without a paycheck for 2 weeks?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, I
Um,
think they do have to give you unemployment for that,
yeah,
but still, even so, you know, that the employer should really be taking care of that kind of
yeah,
situation. And that's why I think, you know, people are becoming more radicalized than they ever have been before. You know, even people that weren't previously involved in politics like you or I are becoming more, oh, phrase coming to visit.
yeah.
But
My cats have been in and out. I'm sure you've seen them.
yeah, but but yeah, people are becoming more radicalized because capitalism is proven not to work. I mean, it not only in the case of COVID, but also in the case of climate change, you know, and in this country, I mean, I guess it's good that Biden wants to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. I'm great. That's great, but it's a bare minimum. But in this
I think,
country, we still have people who literally deny the science, which is
yeah,
not where we need to be, you know.
yeah. No, and I think that's another symbolic gesture, and I think that's the whole Paris climate change in part is the Paris Climate Summit. I should say, excuse me. I think that whole thing by most of the Western powers is very much a symbolic change, because other than the Nordic and Scandinavian countries, and to a degree Germany, who are making great efforts to go to renewable energy and to get off of coal, and oil and stuff like that. Um, it's really just I really think it's been somewhat of a symbolic gesture on their part, and especially here in the U.S. There's no great hurry to do it, where it's like, well, if we don't do something now in the next, just even in the next 10 years, well, I mean, we've already reached the point that we've hit some areas of our climate are irreversible right now. We can't do anything to go back to
Mhm.
certain standards that we had previously. But if we want to be able to survive the next century or two as a species, then we have to do it now, now, now. It's
Right.
not not let's see if we can do it 50 years down the road if it's profitable for us to do it. Fuck if it's profitable. If you want to survive if you want your great grandchildren and their grandchildren to flourish and have a planet that's habitable in the next 200 years, get off your asses and do something about it. You know what I mean?
Well, the
And
idea of like, I would see with this country being capitalist in the way it is, everything is intended to generate profit, and too many people are profiting off of coal and animal agriculture right now,
yeah.
and it's like the idea of like, yeah, fuck it, if it we can afford it or not. You normally would think that, like, oh, say you need heart surgery, fuck, if I can afford it, I'm going to get the heart surgery. But you have to like literally think that in America as well, with our healthcare system, everything is tied to profit to the point of where human life doesn't matter at all. And it's really become more clear than ever during the pandemic and during, the forest fires in California, when climate change really started, show. I mean, like we can see it now. We can see the impact better than
Mhm.
ever. Where we still have, this push to keep restaurants open. We still have this push to continue keeping people at work, which is where they're catching COVID. We still have this push to like not move towards renewable energy in as fast a manner as we could, even though California was on fire, like, and the
Yeah.
sky was red, like, it, because it's ultimately about profit. And I think that is becoming more clear to normal people that don't think about leftist politics like we do all day,
Yeah.
than ever before. Like, yeah, my life does not matter at all in the eyes of the government. It's all profit, and they don't
Mhm.
care if I die. They don't care. And I think that's what's ultimately radicalizing people. And I think that may be a contributing factor to this fracturing of the left. When people have these strong emotions, they tend to veer in different directions, and it's
Mhm.
almost done intentionally, because all these different ideas are out there. But um it's almost like it's done, intentionally by certain, plants that are put in, like, to spread them, like a Candace Owens, but not on the left. I'm trying to think of like who, like, all of a sudden we've been seeing Caleb Maupin, for example, everywhere. Like, I don't recall seeing Caleb Maupin being platformed everywhere 3 years ago. It's
Yeah.
been the last year. Like, what the hell,
Yeah. No. And and another part of the fracture on the left too is I think it's like a lot of like there's like a lot of hostility over things that happened like 100 years ago, and it's
Yeah.
like you like I and I don't do it no more because like it's just pointless and it's a waste of time, is to get on to like the leftist shit posting groups and stuff like that on social media. And
Yeah.
you sit there and you try and have like reasonable discussions. For me, as like someone who's an ML, and I'm like, I go into like an anarchist group and I like talk with anarchists. There's always going to be that one person that's going to be like, you're a fascist, you want to murder me and my family and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, I really don't. like
Right. Yeah.
like not in the slightest. Like I have no reason to dislike you in the slightest. I may have disagreements with you, but I'm I can respect I can respect your opinion on the matter because you and I are just having basic disagreements. It's not like you and I are disagreeing on whether or not a certain group of people should have the right to exist or not. We're just disagreeing on how we both want to achieve the same thing and about how we want to go about it. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I think there is also like a concern. I mean, like, as far as I can see, like you as a Marxist-Leninist, you have the best of intentions, but there is a certain concern amongst, people who lean more anarchist,
Yeah.
that Marxist-Leninists want to implement a state, which, I hate, but that is something that is pretty common, as I'm sure you've seen. So that
Yeah.
concern is definitely there. And I know that I get frustrated as somebody who was like living in a swing state. I mean, or whatever. When I would hear people like say fuck voting for Biden, blah blah blah, and like no, you don't understand, Trump could win. I mean, like when you think about how divided this country already is, I mean, the fact that 75 million people voted for freaking Trump, my God, that many people, like he got the second most votes of anybody in history. That when you think about even that, like to hear somebody from, California or something say, oh, just vote third party or whatever. As much as I voted third party before, and as much as I wanted to, I knew that I didn't have really that option, because
Yeah.
and so it was like it's kind of like I don't know. For me, it's just I feel like there's a lot more people because of how like how impactful politics
Mm.
have been in the past 5 years. There's a lot more people that are new to politics that are have the same level of anger as we did when as I did when I was 17, and I was like, yeah, I'm an anarchy and drawing an anarchy symbol. I feel like that energy has
Mm.
been
It's been
culminating.
amplified.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not like people don't have as sophisticated opinions, even though they can talk the talk. It's like we're both metalheads. It's like when somebody like like a kid who's 19 starts listening to like real death metal all of a sudden, and they think they know everything, but like you know what I mean,
Yeah.
like
It's like,
yeah.
yeah, no, and that's, you know, there's, I don't want to be like, gatekeeping about it, but the baby leftists, as we can fondly call them
Yeah.
sometimes, the people who sit there, the people that will sit there and, they'll wet their pants over Biden, because they're like, oh well, he's still got Bernie involved and everything, even though I wanted Bernie, and all this stuff. Because I
Right.
was there at that point. That was me. That was me in 2015. But
Yeah.
I've moved on from there, and definitely really I've read into theory, and and I'm not saying you have to read theory to make that step.
No.
A great resource is like YouTube, like where you watch videos of people breaking down, critical theory arguments that think of like Lenin's April thesis. They'll sit there and break it down and summarize it into a 15-minute video that you can easily manage rather than sitting there and um, bashing your head against the wall to try and get
Right.
through a book that was written over 100 years ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the point being though is that for me as an ML, I want to say like my end goal is a classless, stateless society.
Hmm.
However, I'm very aware that the capitalist class is the enemy of the working classes, and that class is not going to give up their power and their hold on the state willingly, not by any means. They will use violence. They will use they will use any means necessary to them. That is why you have, we, to go back to the Capitol, riot and attack by these petite bourgeois people that had the means to fly out to DC, who, or they're either living off of their parents, or they're they're well-to-do upper middle class individuals that make $200,000 to $400,000 a year, and have a a $3 or $4 million home, and a boat, and
All right.
multiple 50,000.
Assets. They have assets. Just leave
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. To summarize it, the people who have the means to get there and do that, you know, um, those individuals are not going to give that up. They're not going to give up their power willingly, and
Well, that's
that's the thing.
ultimately what I think this division is about, like the larger
Yeah,
division between, the left and the right.
yeah,
Is that the ruling class, the petite bourgeoisie and the bourgeoisie don't want to give up their power, and they feel like they're losing it as people of color are gaining access to spaces they didn't have before, as gay people have the same rights, and trans people are becoming more visible, so
yeah. No, and it's
yeah.
yeah, it's just basically the times they are changing. Bob Dylan there, and either sink or swim.
Yeah.
But there's this feel amongst this well-to-do class that if the rhetoric that if Biden gets elected, we're a communist country now,
I know, God.
which is
It's hilarious.
just so remarkably and dumbfoundingly idiotic.
Right.
Like, like, they're, it's the same people. They're like saying that, Obama's gonna come for our guns and all this nonsense.
Well, now Biden's gonna come. Hillary was gonna come for our guns. So far,
Yeah,
everybody still has their guns. I'm
yeah,
planning on getting a few myself,
yeah.
but
But the whole point being is that, as an ML, for me myself, like, I realize, like, the capitalist class is highly organized, highly efficient, and very easily motivated to go to lengths of extreme violence if necessary, and to use any means available to them to maintain their power.
the problem is
I
they have the police and they have the military.
Absolutely. So, I'm more than aware of those aspects, and I'm more than aware that, for us on the left to, achieve our goals realistically, the ways and means to do that is to overthrow the capitalist state and replace it with a socialist state. That's going to be the quickest and, in my mind, the most tried and true method. It's worked in the past. Now, I'm not advocating to do exactly what China has done, or what the USSR had done. What works in one country isn't going to work in another.
Hmm.
We have to kind of develop if we can achieve a socialist state, it has to be one that's going to work for us, and one that is going to address our needs, as our material needs and everything, as a country that has gone through capitalism. I think, like, I try to imagine to myself, what would a socialist society in the United States look like after the overthrow of capitalism here. We've already had capitalism here. We're not going to be like China or the USSR, where they didn't have capitalism, they just immediately jumped to socialism from a feudal monarchy. you
Right.
know we had that stepping stone. So obviously, what worked there isn't going to work here, because we're historically different. We have a different historical context. So, to me, I believe that there are that idea of establishing a worker state is generally the right direction to go in. And I'm not saying the state is the end all be all either. I like I said at the beginning, I believe in a classless, stateless society as the end goal, but I believe to get there, the worker state is a necessary stepping stone, and that we need to develop a worker state that is, would in my mind somewhat become like a libertarian socialist worker state, if that makes sense. I know that's kind of like an oxymoron to a degree, and that it's a contrasting a bit of a contrast. But I feel like if you had like a system where where we would have a constitution like we have now, but maybe expanded upon to include things like the right to a job, the right to health care, the right to a home.
Why have a job? Not everybody needs to work. You know how many jobs, like the thing is, I mean, I get what you're saying, the right to a job, but like eventually we have to get to the point where it's like, you know how many jobs people are holding right now that don't need to exist? Why don't we streamline to the point like where, people don't have to? I mean, I've been in sales for a long time, and I can
Yeah.
tell you there's a ton of sales jobs that are just straight up scams that don't need to exist. And I know that,
Yeah, no,
I mean, like, so why should it be? It should be the right to fruitful
when I
life, the
say
right, yeah.
when I say a right to work, I mean like the right if you so choose.
Yeah,
That not that your survival should be based upon what you can produce for a society. As basically, as a human right, it should be guaranteed, since we have more than the means to do it, that people should be provided for, have at least have their basic needs met. You know what I mean?
right.
A home, access to healthcare, access to education, and if they so choose to hold a job. But and I'm all for automation if
Yeah,
if it isn't going in the direction of capitalist automation. You know what I mean?
right. Yeah,
Um, whereas it's a cutting cost measure to where you're liquidating someone's income and basically their means to survive, and you're not replacing it with anything else. You know what I mean?
see,
Or what is replaced is worse off than what they had before.
right. See, I think, the issue really lies in this idea that what it's hierarchy. Like I think that, okay, let me step back here and say
Mhm.
what I really want to say. But so basically the major reason that communism hasn't been implemented in a way that has been successful worldwide, besides government sanctions and stuff like that, has to do with the fact that deeply ingrained in, especially in American society, is this idea that one person is better than another. So
Mhm.
that idea really needs to be torn down through discourse over a period of time before we can implement those systems. And we do that by adopting the more Nordic model, where we enhance the welfare state to a point where people can live in dignity, whether or not they choose to work. I think UBI, it would be a far easier to pass and far more incremental into the kind of society that we want to create than the Green New Deal's, jobs guarantee.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, if we could free up more busy work, it's like I was saying, I've been in sales and an office environment for a very long time, and there's a lot of busy work that doesn't need to be done, that is being done right now, that is giving people a false sense of superiority. I know even I fall prey to it when I dress like a businesswoman and go to work in the morning. Even I fall prey to it. I know that um a lot of people have jobs that don't need to be done. And I think that we'd be far better off as a society, and it would pass far easier if we could implement a UBI system, increase the welfare state, These
Mhm.
are the kinds of things that would ultimately lead people in the direction of true egalitarianism,
Yeah.
because hierarchy is so prevalent in our society, and it's built upon what is the first question people ask each other? What do you do for work? And if somebody
Right.
says, like if somebody says, like I'm an insurance salesman, and then somebody else is a neurosurgeon, and then somebody else is a cashier. Think
Yeah.
about what that really is saying to, we view the cashier fairly differently than we view the neurosurgeon, you
Yeah.
know
Yeah. And I
even
think that goes, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
oh, no, go ahead, you're fine.
But I think, yeah, and I think that goes back to the whole thing of like what Marx says, each according to their ability based upon their need.
Hmm.
To me, like, no, if it provides a service or a good that people consume, the job is not meaningless.
Right.
It is not an unskilled labor. Skilled labor is skilled. The whole skilled unskilled labor argument is just classist division rhetoric. It's propaganda at its root core. It's
Mhm.
basically saying, it's basically, the bougie pig banker, telling the who owns the coal mine, telling the coal miner to, hey, look over there. There's someone who makes less than you. You should look down on them because they're also organizing and wanting to, you know, get better pay and stuff like that.
Right.
It's just a tactic used by the capitalist class to divert class consciousness away from the fact that honestly we're all in the same boat together. Even the neurosurgeon, yeah, the neurosurgeon may make 200 or $300,000 a year, but that neurosurgeon could very easily be in a position one day where that income is no longer available to them. So you're telling me that their worth as a human being is solely based off of the skill that they can provide to our society?
That's
You know?
well, that's what capitalism has really done to
Yeah,
the human condition. It's really tied our labor into our self-worth, and in doing that, I think that we've divided our society even further, because we
yeah,
are we are fragmenting based on where we fit into the labor system, the labor market. We're fragmenting who we
yeah,
are, and then that's why we can't achieve the egalitarian state that is necessary for true communism to flourish.
yeah. No, and I think, like, in part that this whole looking down on, for example, fast food workers wanting to make $15 an hour, and
Yep.
like this whole just absolute, um like I said, just look over there, look at them, like, I mean, like it's almost like that one episode of Family Guy where they're like in the deep south, and a witness protection agency, and they piss off all the town folk, and like, Brian distracts the town folks so they can make a getaway, and he says, hey, look, there's a newly married interracial gay couple burning the American flag.
Right.
That's essentially what it boils down to is, it's just,
Yeah.
hey, look over here, focus your attention on that. Don't focus on me sticking my hand in your wallet and taking the surplus value of your labor.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just, to me, it's just a redundancy, and then we get to that argument of, you know I don't even want to call them, I don't even want to call them people who believe in capitalism. I don't believe, unless you are a capitalist, that you can ethically and logically and responsibly believe in capitalism as a whole. Um, I there's people that just absolutely just bootlick up to the capitalist class, even though they have nothing in common with those people whatsoever. you know.
There's illusion of social mobility that they can
Yeah,
climb to their level, like the people
yeah.
who live.
Why basically why are you cheering Fry? You're not rich, you know.
Right, but they think that because they live in what are those called? Those McMansion type of houses that are just garish and not anything the true bourgeoisie would ever have. They think that they're closer
Yeah,
and really, you know what I mean? So that's what, and I think that's what we see a lot with the Trump supporting crowd, you know what I mean? The people who live in the suburbs and are just scared to death. Like that, I mean, Trump did that whole ploy, just scaring older white women that scary black and Black Lives Matter and Antifa protesters were just going to take over their clean little suburbs,
yeah,
and I mean, that's really what we're seeing. Is like I have a right to live in an area where I don't have to see the reality of the American condition, where like there are people who are homeless and stuff like that. And these are the people that vote on things like in local elections to keep a homeless shelter out of their neighborhood, keep the drug, you know what I mean? It's the
yeah,
same thing. And I think we really see that. And that is the class division in our society. Whereas like instead of looking at the fact that there are homeless people in America and saying, God, how shameful that in the richest country in the world we allow veterans or just anyone to sleep on the street, rather than see that, it's like we think they must be bad because they allowed themselves to get in that position. That is what is ingrained in this culture. And I think that really does, I'm about to go on a tangent here, but I think that really does come from Christianity and in the puritanical values that have been solidified into this country, into the founding of this country, that state that hard work, a good work ethic is really what's makes you prosperous. I mean, is it Max Weber or in the product? No, it's Max Weber and Weber and the Protestant work ethic, where he talked about how the Puritan values of like a hard work ethic are really what drove the capitalist ideology, which meant that if you made a lot of money, you must have been good in the Lord's eyes because you worked hard. And I think it all stems from that. And that's why some people in our society, the people who are more likely to be capitalists and the people who have succeeded and have had the privileges to succeed, have been born into that, because oftentimes that's the only reason they're in the position they're in,
right.
are more likely to look down on people who might live on the street or
Yeah.
have
No,
come to addiction or something like that.
no, totally. That's, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Is that I have nice things. I have a nice house, therefore I must be a good person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's just like I want to like grab some of these people and just like shake them for a moment and be like, do you hear yourself, like when you say you're pro Christian values, but you sit there and you scorn the poor and the weak and the tired and the hungry at the same time. Be like, did you listen when you go to church at Sunday? Do you actually listen to the Bible, or do you just like drift in and out?
Yeah.
Like, did you miss the part where Jesus, himself said it is easier to get a camel through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to get into heaven? You know,
They definitely did, and I think a lot of that came from too the evangelical movements in the late 80s, early 90s, that
yeah,
this prosperity gospel that was going around. And it's like in certain sectors of society, and then this is where I do fall into like, I will agree that there are certain rural communities, for example, that have fallen on hopeless times, sometimes the only way out is through this gospel. That's what has saved them or whatever. And so like they find after a certain amount of time, they're just no longer in touch with reality. Chris Hedges really talks about this in his book Christian Fascism. I definitely right, and it talks about the Christian right and how it eventually succumbed to fascism. It's basically at a certain point they're just no longer in touch with reality at all, and so they there's this disconnect, where like they really believe that God is going to bless them with material things at a certain point because they're just so desperate with not having what they need.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so like that's
Right.
their only way out. That's their only hope. And it leads to a really dark place, especially in these mega churches, because of the kind of gospel they preach is like there's a lot of hateful rhetoric, especially towards homosexuals and Muslims. That's huge,
Yeah,
So
there's also a lot towards Jews as well because
yep.
the anti-Semitism within the evangelical movement is very rapidly growing. I mean, I'm not going to name any names, but there's a person that's I consider family,
Mm-hmm.
even though I'm not blood related to them. That person is Jewish,
Yeah.
and they've received death threats from evangelical Christians and stuff like that.
Right.
Or that person's child has been told by their classmates that they're going to hell because they're a Jew
That's
or stuff like that.
disgusting. Yeah, that
And
really upsets me.
yeah, no, and it upsets me even more. It upsets me even more because these are people I personally consider family, and I'm
Right.
very protective of because I'm well aware of the rapidly growing anti-Semitism, and especially like these pseudo woke, especially too as well as like these pseudo woke right wingers that go on and watch Prager U videos for hours on end and shit like that, and they or like the Rothschilds are and George Soros this and all that. It's really just the same old trope that you're getting from the National Socialistische Deutsche Arbeiterparty, where
Right.
they're basically saying the Jews control the banks and stuff like that, or
But it was
the
really
stab in the back of the neck.
covert. It's been really covert. Like William Cooper really brought all this back into the ethos because I mean those anti-Semitic conspiracy theories have been around forever, right? That the Jews
Yeah,
own the
no,
bank,
they just
but
and they just totally rebrand them and repackage them to fit the modern time,
mm-hmm.
Um, it's just, basically them saying the same things that, today, if Goebbels was alive today, he would be, wetting his pants with just pure love over some of the nonsense that these idiots come up with, and it's just to me it's just absolutely like it's disgusting and horrific. There are people that even outright are now more and more denying that the Holocaust ever happened and things like that.
Well, I mean, it's not like that didn't exist before, but but ever since like Trump became mainstream, I feel like those people have been platformed a lot more. Because
Yeah, no,
I
absolutely.
mean, I've heard of people who believed that stuff before. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
Nazi punks fuck off has been a thing for a long time. You know what I
right.
mean? And but it's
Yeah, you have like people like that, Marjorie Green Taylor, becoming, she's an elected official now in the I think it's the House of Representatives. Yeah, now she's an elected official in the House of Representatives.
right.
She is a full blown Holocaust denier,
Yep.
as so on several occasions that she doesn't believe that it actually happened and all that, which, doesn't surprise me because she's also said that, the Parkland shootings and the Sandy Hook
Sandy
shooting,
Hook. Oh yeah.
yeah, it didn't happen and stuff like that, that they were false flag ops. But
Yeah.
it's just this pseudo woke um the pseudo woke right wing conspiracy theory nonsense. Just I believe a lot of it also comes from the evangelical movement because the evangelicals are just making stuff up on the spot to you know scare people into this belief of um getting this belief that their version of Christianity is somehow the right way and all this stuff like that, and that you should scorn the poor, the meek, the miserable, tired, and
Well, it's this
hungry.
ultimate supremacy that,
Yeah, no,
it isn't Christianity in the way that Jesus, supposedly taught or whatever, the teachings of Jesus. It is a kind of supremacy that they want to hold over the rest of the
right.
population. I mean, if you really go break it down, that how many times have you heard America is founded on Christian values? It truly is, but that's not a good thing.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
not founded. To me, it's not founded on Christian values. It's founded on. It's the same. It's to me, it's the same thing as looking at North Korea and calling North Korea a communist country. You know what I mean?
Well,
It
I
has
guess it depends on whether or not you think Christianity is ultimately a force for good or a force for bad. But I mean, that's not really where this is supposed to go. That the
yeah.
direction, but you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
no,
Yeah.
yeah, no. But I guess what I'm saying is like it's got all the trappings, but no substance. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Um, but if anything, I feel like Jesus should be an idol of the left. At least the personification of Jesus should be an idol of the left. If we're in the sense that he was a Jewish revolutionary who was murdered by the Roman state because he was preaching things that went against the status quo of of the order of the day. You know what I mean? Well,
Yeah.
and a very even for back then, we people look at it, and hear the things that he's saying, and it's like, oh, that's just common sense today. Back then what he was saying was very dangerous shit to be saying.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
but that this just it's mind-boggling to me just how far removed from that Christianity, Catholicism, Protestantism has become. It's just, yeah, I mean, it's very, to me, I think it's very much a symptom of capitalism. Just this well-to-do bougie mentality that comes along with that. That
Mm.
you go to oh, I must be a good person. I went to church, and Jesus forgives me. So
Right.
I'm gonna go on Facebook and talk shit about how this black person deserved to be murdered by the cops because weren't they weren't cooperating with them. Be like, if you were in the same situation, you were being accused of shit that you didn't think you had done wrong, would you
Hmm.
cooperate? Or anything
Well,
like.
the people who apologized for that really want their figures of authority, like the police, to be just. So
Yeah,
they'll make any excuse that whatever these people in authority do is justified. You know what I mean?
right,
So like, yeah, and they don't want to. It's the same people that don't want to hear about America's history with eugenics or whatever, because they want to believe that cops are good, America is a good country, and they just don't want to hear anything otherwise. So anything else, like anything that is the antithesis of that, any theories that are just ultimately, from like this leftist collegiate cultural Marxist theory, and that's where I think this cultural Marxist like cultural Marxist like resurgence is coming from, because people are like learning about, the reality of America. It sucks. Like white people are finally learning that America sucks for everybody who isn't white, and they don't want to hear it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they just want to believe that it's coming from colleges, and then that is that's what led to like this new resurgence of conspiracy theories that were pretty prevalent during like the twin tower attacks, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they, they can't handle the reality that their government funded, that the government could have possibly funded a terrorist who was helping, funnel arms and money to um, fighters in Afghanistan to fight the Soviets, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend,
Right.
and would come back, some 20 years later and bite them in the ass, you know.
Yeah.
You know, one of my favorite rappers, Sage Francis, he did a song called Makeshift Patriot, where he actually released it like a month after 9/11 occurred.
Mm-hmm.
And like one of my favorite lines is that we taught that dog to squat, and how dare he do that shit in our own backyard. You
Yeah.
know, that the is where that comes from, is people can't handle the truth of that. So they want to grasp on to, anything that's going to um justify their own cognitive dissonance of the fact that we are not a great country. We are we are probably the world's biggest sponsor of terrorism, have been for
Mm-hmm.
decades. We have Our state has a near monopolized stranglehold on violence that it dishes out um, to just about anyone who conflicts against the status quo. That's the whole thing with cops and the hierarchical structure of the capitalist state, is that it's going to crush anyone and everyone who is dissentive,
Mm-hmm.
you know
Yeah.
and it's going to make examples of people, so that there isn't a mass uprising when they go and do things like lock little children up in cages on the border.
Right.
um it's just this absolute colossal system of repression and oppression, and you know it's it's absolutely just totally devastating, disgusting, and
Are
horrific.
you at all worried about the new security measures that are being put in place and the new violations of privacy, I guess we can call it, that are put in place since the insurrection, against the insurrectionists, the doxing that went on, the all the security measures that happened? Because for me, like, as much as I do think that they insurrectionists committed a crime, several of them did, and the crackdown worries me that any dissenters, such as leftists, will also face the same, if not worse, consequences in the area. I mean, like, I feel like we're seeing the era of a new Patriot Act, and that worries me. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, my thoughts are pretty much the same. I'm not going to sit there and, shed tears over the QAnon shaman losing 20 pounds in a federal pen because he won't eat his specially organic food. Nothing like that.
Right.
But, at the same time, I'm not going to be thrilled about them cracking down on everyone and anyone as a whole, and especially with how the media labeled it when it first happened, is because I heard terms like anarchists being thrown around
Hmm.
a lot with, CNN, MSNBC, and
Good
other,
point.
mainstream media groups as them throwing these terms around. They weren't the I think I had heard that fascist was used once by, I think it was somebody on either ABC or NBC, to describe this movement, or the riot that occurred in DC.
Right.
But I
But
heard
that's what
other,
it was. And that's the thing that's upsetting because it
yeah,
literally was a fascist up.
yeah, it was a fascist coup. No,
Yeah.
there's no ifs, ands, or buts to argue on that. But the media is portraying it, and there's another word I hear is extremists.
Hmm.
Extremists popping up, and that takes me back to thinking about, a line from, like, I don't mean to keep, like, bringing up songs and music, but like flogging Molly, once was the communist, now is the terrorist.
Hmm. Or like,
You know?
even you think about the way that the Black Panthers were described, i- in their
Right.
day, you know what I mean? Like, and the way they're described now as extremists, it's like, eh, I think that they're doing that and it's very calculated, it's very planned because they want to be able to attack either side that gets out of line. And that's the problem I think that we have in this country. The left is always going to face more scrutiny for
Hmm.
because we're going up against the status quo, whereas the right is honestly just fighting to withhold the status quo, so they're never going to get as much pushback from the
Yeah.
state as the left does. But um but I think that is ultimately the kind of hopelessness that people get. And like certain, like I feel like it's happened, with me, like even occasionally, like I'm just happy with anything they give me. It's like on the Democrats, and we need to demand more from the Democrats. We can't rest on our laurels. We can't just be like, oh well, they're at least they're not as awful as the Republicans. It's almost like it was purposely um calculated that the Republicans had to get progressively worse and worse and worse just to make the Democrats look better by comparison, when they've really gone so far to the right that they're
Yeah.
Republicans from the 70s at this point.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, American politics in general is the spectrum of American politics in general is just so skewered towards the right. It's not even
Right.
funny.
Right.
I mean, like, Sanders anywhere else in the world, for example, he would be your center left liberal
Yep.
anywhere else. Here he's viewed as a radical socialist.
And look at how they freaked out when he just said that he admitted that Cuba has a decent medical system. The entire country had a panic attack, like heaven forbid you say anything good about a communist nation. Like you are a communist by proxy, even though he said repeatedly he is not. Like,
Right. No, and it's like, well, what did he say? Like, what did he say? Like, what he said, was it, like, in any way inaccurate? you
no,
know,
yeah.
Cuba has one of the best medical systems in the world. And the Cuban people can thank Che Guevara for that, because Che Guevara was a medical doctor before he was a revolutionary.
Yeah,
He
exactly.
was the one that implemented that. He was the one that, initiated the programs of sending, doctors abroad to learn at the best schools in the world, so that when they came back to Cuba, they would have the best doctors per capita than anyone else. But
Yeah.
going off on a tangent here, but no, going back to that, it's just the American political spectrum is just so far removed from the left because of the Red Scare in the 20s, McCarthyism in the 50s, so on and so forth. Is just this very concerted effort on the part of not just the federal government but the capitalist class, that holds the reins of the federal government and the media by proxy, who is owned by and large by the capitalist class,
Mm-hmm.
to just to basically just but yeah, it's basically just like a straight concerted effort to absolutely just um crush any type of real change in the direction of progressivism, or even, for fuck's sake, social democracy. Like, I would, like, to me, like, yeah, I'm not gonna say, I'm not gonna sit there and like do a victory lap if we made a change towards social democracy, but at the same time I would be like, fuck, like, this is like like, this is what I was hoping for the last 4 or 5 years. Just this would be, you know enough for now. But
Right.
I'm not gonna sit there and be like, we did it, guys. We've reached the final end goal. No, there's more work to be done. And
Absolutely.
going back to Biden, that's the same thing with like the Biden administration. Is like, yeah, I'm happy Trump's gone. I'm happy that his supporters are getting scorned as they rightfully should be,
Mm-hmm.
and facing the consequences of their actions, and parts if they did participate in that coup attempt in the Capitol. um, but there's still work to be done, and there's not much you can depend on with the current administration that's coming in. You really can trust them about as far as you can throw them.
Yeah. Well,
And
like the thing is too, I think it's important that on the left we don't fall into this trap of only criticizing Democrats either. I mean, we see that happening, especially with your Jimmy Dore type figures, and
mm,
even certain people in leftist groups. I just seen them just consistently criticizing Democrats or saying they're no different than Trump, and I mean that's just simply not true. So it's like there is a balance, like we have to applaud policy first and foremost. The fact that Trump tried to pass the stimulus bill at $2,000, and I think it was a ploy, but I ultimately think that was a good thing,
yeah,
even though it was done by Trump. And now the fact that Biden is trying to give paid medical leave to essential workers and raise the minimum wage for federal workers, and slowly incrementally raise the minimum wage for all workers over a period of 5 years. That's a good thing, and
yeah,
we can't just consistently dunk on one party or the other. And I feel like that is going on the left as well. Like certain factions of the
yeah,
left are consistently only criticizing Democrats. It's important we criticize everybody that's doing something that is not within the best interest of where we want to be. And as
mm,
far as the influencers go specifically, I mean that it's in the name. They have a lot of influence, and it is affecting the overall atmosphere in a lot of different leftist groups online, or even in the streets in the protests. So
yeah.
yeah.
No, and I mean, like, my loyalties first and foremost will lie with um being totally dedicated to a workers revolution.
Right.
That's not going to change for me anytime soon. But like I said before and earlier on, I'm happy. I'd be more than willing to work with liberals and Democrats
Mm-hmm.
than I would be to work with Trump supporters.
Yeah.
I will never work with Trump
They
supporters
don't want to
on
work
about
with us.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the thing that people
yeah,
don't realize.
no,
They have no interest at all in working with us.
yeah, and
Liberals may not right now either, but they're more likely to work with us.
yeah, yeah, no, and they're more likely to at least hear our side out of it. And that's the thing too. At the same time, is like, why would I try to why would I want to work with someone who is anti-Semitic, or someone who is outspokenly racist,
Right.
or is just an absolute just you know garbage bag full of dog shit for a human person.
Right.
Why would I want to? Why would I care what they think, or why would I give a flying fuck about their opinion on anything? At
They,
that
I mean,
point.
like, at certain point, it's like, I hate to say it, it was like some ideas just don't need to be heard, like the idea, like, we don't need to see people mocking the murder of George Floyd in
Yeah,
order to venerate Blue Lives Matter. Like, that just doesn't, I don't care. It's not about suppressing free speech. It's just
yeah,
an ideology that doesn't deserve a platform at
yeah.
all.
No, and I'm 100% for that. Like, and I've made the argument. I've made the argument numerous times that, yeah, I believe in critical free speech. I believe in speech that is critical.
Mm-hmm.
What I don't consider free speech is hate speech,
Mm-hmm.
because it isn't critical. It's propaganda and lies. It's bullying at its basic core. It's
Mm-hmm.
just straight up bullying. That's all it is. So what, to me, like, you go to if you send your kid to school or whatever, and they bully a kid, why should they be allowed to do that? Why should they be allowed to torment, someone else for no good reason? Fuck them, dude. Fuck their free speech at that point.
Right.
They don't
Exactly.
they don't deserve it. They're
Exactly.
not using it in a constructive and critical manner that is engaging and reasonable and logical. They're just doing it to be assholes.
Yeah. And I honestly, it's like, like I feel like we've spent our entire, like, America has been listening to the Trump supporter crowd for since we became a nation state. Our entire electoral college system is built around their voice, which is why somebody in Wyoming has 4 times the voting power of somebody in California. So it's like, why is there this discourse that we need to listen to the disheartened Trump supporter? We've been listening to them, and shit sucks. You know what I mean? Like, it
Mm.
sucks. Maybe we should listen to, the people in cities, where there are more of us. Like, I'm sorry, if you live in the middle of a cornfield, you're not really relevant to what I mean. I'm not saying that those people don't matter. That's not, it's just the same people would benefit that, if people who live in cities where there are more people got benefits. You know what I mean? All people would benefit. It's not like,
Right.
so it's like we've been listening to a specific sector of society for hundreds of years just because of the electoral college system, and now all of a sudden we're pretending like they haven't been listened to, and it's just a complete false narrative that
Yeah.
is,
It's a complete sham, and it goes back to the whole the whole thing of the three-fifths compromise as to whether or not, so the slaveholding states in the South could count a black person as three-fifths of a person for the
yeah.
census count, so they can get more representation in the House of Representatives and all that,
Mhm.
or the Senate. It's just like, it's like, I'm sorry, you live in a rural area. I want to make your life better as much as I want to make mine better,
Right.
but you're not going to win me over by, this um, bigoted mentality that you carry. And if you can't, get out of the echo chamber that you've been in your whole entire life, and realize that the rest of the world does not view that lightly, and does not view that as proper etiquette in any manner, then you need to piss and get off the pot.
Hmm.
You either need to make a change in your life as to how you view the world, or you need to step aside. you
Right.
know.
All right. Well, on that note, I guess this is a good place to end our discussion tonight. So signing off for Black and Red to Save the World. This is Tabs and Kyle. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say my farewells. Thanks for listening. If you all enjoyed our podcast, feel free to leave us a like, some comments. Some critical feedback is always welcome. And subscribe if you can. It goes a long way towards us expanding our horizons and producing more content in the future for you all to enjoy and listen to. In the next episode, I believe we're planning to talk about a few more topics, especially digging into the pandemic and how it's affecting us personally, and how capitalism's fragility has been pretty exposed by this whole global pandemic that's currently going on and is looking to go on for longer.
Also, I think, we want to touch on mental health during the pandemic and how it's exacerbated conspiracy culture. But also another thing is share this on social media if you liked what you heard. Definitely share it with your friends. We're brand new at this, and so it's important to support small leftist projects. And yeah, like he said, like, subscribe, comment, give us critical feedback. We're just starting out, so we try really hard to respond to all of our comments or questions. And also, if you have any ideas on what you want us to talk about in the coming weeks, definitely we are open to any ideas. So you could post those in the comments below as well. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast tonight, and thanks again for listening. Have a good one.
Have a good night.
All right. Bye now.